Of course. Here is the paraphrased script, maintaining the same grim, documentary-style tone while slightly altering the word order and sentence structure. ****. In the unforgiving wilderness of Alaska's Wrangell Mountains, where winter temperatures plummet to -60 degrees and daylight fades to mere hours, a dark chapter of American history remained buried beneath the snow for decades. This is the harrowing account of Jacob and Elelonina Caldwell, first cousins whose bloodline had intertwined for generations. During the winter of 1938, their desperate fight for survival would lead them down a path of unimaginable depravity. Our story begins in the small, isolated settlement of Copper Valley, established in 1893 by a group of miners seeking fortune in Alaska's harsh interior. Among the original settlers were the Caldwell brothers, Thomas and William. Their descendants would eventually establish a pattern of familial unions, creating a closed genetic pool that spanned 4 generations. The Caldwells kept to themselves, recounts historian Dr. Margaret Thornton, who dedicated 15 years to researching this case. By the 1930s, local records show the Caldwell family had intermarried to such a degree that nearly every member shared at least one grandparent. This isolation wasn't merely geographic, it was deliberately maintained. Born in 1908 to William Caldwell Jr. and his cousin wife Sarah, Jacob Caldwell exhibited the telltale physical traits of generations of consanguinity, unusually close-set eyes, a protruding brow, and a significantly reduced stature. A traveling doctor's journal from 1932 noted that Jacob suffered from a peculiar form of mental slowness, though not entirely without cunning. His first cousin and eventual wife, Elelonina, born in 1912, displayed similar characteristics, a hunched posture, malformed fingers, and what local accounts described as episodes of uncontrollable rage. Their union in 1933, while raising eyebrows even in the isolated community, was hardly unprecedented within the Caldwell lineage. What distinguished Jacob and Elelonina was their decision to establish their own homestead even further from civilization, in a remote valley accessible only by a treacherous mountain pass that became impassable during winter months. They weren't running from judgment, explains anthropologist William Hayes. They were continuing a tacit tradition of isolation that had defined their family for generations. The Caldwells believed outside blood would weaken them, that their resilience to Alaska's harsh conditions was the result of their purified bloodline. By 1937, Elelonina had given birth to 3 children, all of whom exhibited severe developmental abnormalities. The eldest, Thomas, age 4, could not speak and suffered frequent seizures. Mary, age 2, was born with a cleft palate so severe that feeding her required special techniques. The youngest, infant James, born in the spring of 1937, had a dramatically enlarged head and could not support it without assistance. These children represented the cumulative genetic burden of generations of consanguinity, explains geneticist Dr. Sarah Chun. When closely related individuals reproduce, recessive genetic disorders become dramatically more common. The Caldwell children were bearing the full weight of their parents' shared genetic material. The winter of 1937-38 arrived earlier than expected. By early October, the path to Copper Valley was already blocked by a heavy snowfall. Jacob had failed to properly prepare, having spent much of the summer in bed with what Elelonina later described as one of his sickness periods, likely episodes of depression that historical accounts suggest were common among the inbred Caldwell line. Their food stores, insufficient even for a mild winter, began to dwindle by December. Game had migrated to lower elevations. The family's situation grew desperate as temperatures dropped to record lows. What happened next was reconstructed years later through Elelonina's journal, discovered in 1952 by a surveyor mapping potential routes for what would eventually become the Richardson Highway. The journal, written in a childlike scrawl on the backs of pages torn from an old Sears catalog, documented the family's descent into the darkest form of survival. An entry dated January 16, 1938, reads, "The boy gone today. Jacob says it God's will. The little ones need meat. We keep all parts we can use." This entry marks the beginning of what would become known among forensic historians as the Caldwell winter atrocity. Thomas, the eldest child, weakened by malnutrition and his genetic conditions, had died not from starvation, but from a deliberate act, according to later forensic analysis. The journal's clinical description indicates that Jacob and Elelonina processed their son's remains as they would have a hunted animal. This wasn't merely desperation, notes criminal historian Robert Jameson. The journal entries show a disturbing lack of emotional response. Elelonina writes about her son's remains with the detachment one might use to describing preserving meat. By February, with winter showing no signs of relenting, 2-year-old Mary also went to God, as Elelonina's journal puts it. The pattern repeated, the remains were processed and preserved in the sub-zero temperatures of a storage shed. What makes this case particularly disturbing from a psychological perspective, explains forensic psychologist Dr. Ilan Morris, is the combination of the cognitive deficits likely resulting from generations of inbreeding, the extreme isolation, and the survival pressure of the Alaskan winter. The Caldwells appear to have rationalized their actions through a distorted religious framework. Most disturbing of all was the realization, pieced together by investigators in the 1950s, that infant James did not die of natural causes. An entry from March 9, 1938, reads simply, "The baby cries too much. Jacob says, 'It is time. Tomorrow we will have food again. God provides.'" The Caldwells survived until spring. When the snow began to melt in late April, Jacob ventured over the pass to Copper Valley for supplies. According to town records, he appeared thin but not starving and spoke little of the winter's hardships. He purchased supplies, ammunition, and, surprisingly, fabric for new children's clothes. He was already planning for replacements, Dr. Morris suggests grimly. The journal indicates Elelonina was pregnant again by June 1938. The truth about the Caldwell family's winter might have remained buried forever if not for a chance discovery 14 years later. In the summer of 1952, surveyor Michael Donovan and his assistant were charting the remote valleys when they came across the abandoned Caldwell homestead. "What we found inside that shed will haunt me until my dying day," Donovan wrote in his official report. Small bones, clearly human, with precise cut marks consistent with butchering techniques. Some showed signs of having been boiled. In the corner, wrapped in oilcloth, we discovered the journal. The discovery prompted a discreet federal investigation. It revealed Jacob Caldwell had died in 1949 from complications of a genetic liver disorder. Elelonina had returned to the small Caldwell enclave in Copper Valley with 3 new children, all exhibiting similar developmental issues. She never spoke of the winter of 1938, but local rumors persisted. People noted that she referred to her second set of children by the same names, Thomas, Mary, and James, as if she were replacing the one she had lost, reports Janice Miller, whose grandmother lived in Copper Valley. When federal investigators interviewed Elelonina in 1952, they found a woman whose grip on reality had severely deteriorated. At just 40 years old, she appeared decades older. She spoke of the children as if they were all alive. When pressed about that winter, she would only say, "We did what was necessary." The family continues. The blood stays pure. Genetic analysis confirmed the investigators' suspicions. The degree of genetic homozygosity was among the highest ever recorded in humans at that time. The Caldwell lineage represents a unique case study in human genetic isolation, explains Dr. Chun. Their bloodline had become so concentrated that the genetic diversity was comparable to what you might find between third-generation siblings. In a very real sense, they were prisoners of their own biology, suggests neuropsychologist Dr. Henry Wilson. Generations of inbreeding had altered brain development in ways that affected their capacity for empathy and moral judgment. By 1953, authorities decided to place Elelonina in a psychiatric institution in Anchorage, where she remained until her death in 1965. Her 3 surviving children were placed in a specialized care facility. The last surviving child died in 1979, ending the direct line of this branch of the Caldwell family. Perhaps the most chilling discovery came during Elelonina's psychiatric evaluation. When asked directly about the winter of 1938, she responded, "We kept the strongest parts inside us. Nothing wasted. The family continues through what we preserved." This statement suggests that in her distorted worldview, consuming her children represented a perverse continuation of the family bloodline. The Caldwells had created their own closed universe with its own logic, notes anthropologist James Harrison. Within that logic, their actions made sense to them. This is the danger of complete isolation combined with generations of inbreeding. Reality itself becomes warped. The cabin where these dark acts took place was deliberately burned by federal authorities in 1953. Today, the site is unmarked and largely forgotten. The Caldwell case remains a stark warning about the biological and psychological consequences of extreme isolation and inbreeding, a dark reminder of how quickly the veneer of civilization can erode.